Well, what sparked it was the two exchange students in my high school. I didn't even know there was such a thing, and so I wanted what they had, which is going somewhere else and learning about another place. And I went off to the University of Tennessee at the age of 17, and I thought, I'm just going to apply for everything, and maybe someday I'll get something and be able to go abroad. So I was chosen for Operation Crossroads Africa my very first year, and I'd never been on an airplane, but went to Ethiopia when I was 18 in 1970, and learned a tremendous amount. And then that was the shift in my life toward all international educational exchange, as well as cross-cultural understanding and knowledge. Well, there are deeply satisfying things that are individual, as well as deeply satisfying things that are collective efforts. So examples of the individual would be when the first DACA student was able to study abroad, when an international student got a particularly important internship that was going to help him or her in their future, when the faculty finally got their H-1B visa back in the day. So there were all kinds of individual satisfactions, but then the collective ones, particularly related to NAFSA, would be around advocacy. Advocating for Fulbright or Gilman funding, advocating for access to study abroad, advocating for access to U.S. universities, and that kind of advocacy was related predominantly to immigration regulations. And so advocacy has been a central area of satisfaction that I'm using on into my own retirement. I think the biggest change in the field is the same as the biggest change perhaps in the world, which is social media. And it matters how it's used. The consciousness with which people use social media, it can be a phenomenal force for social justice, for access to food and water. It can be an incredibly positive force, and it can equally be a force for fear and dissension and separation. And so I think social media is the biggest force in our field and in the world. And I think predominantly in the context of international educational exchange, it is used for the purposes of social justice in our world. And so right on social media. Well, those moments are almost daily. I think international education makes a tremendous difference. And so whether it's the international student, scholar, faculty member who needs help negotiating the new community that they've arrived in, whether it's help with visa processes, whether it's help with, I was this great student back in Name the Country, and now I'm facing classes that I don't understand, or as a PhD student or postdoc, I'm facing being a teaching assistant and not understanding how it works here, that the US students don't act the same way. And so as each person matriculates in their role in our field, we get to be present for all these different moments. And then we're present also for our own moments of aha. And some of that can be like in leadership. Instead of leaning in, I think it's important that we lean sideways and on each other, because it's through that encouragement and support of the persons we serve and those of us in the profession that really makes a difference in how we progress. And it's really important to persist when during the hardest times, because there is an ebb and a flow to life, as well as to international educational exchange. And so I remember being overjoyed when one piece of legislation is passed, for example, that the DACA students could study abroad, and then some years later they can't leave the country and are fear for even being able to stay. And so because I've been in the field so long, I can maintain my hope, my persistence and my hope, because I know that there's an ebb and a flow to governments, to life. And so I guess I would like to say that as a reminder to people that during the darkest days, turn to other people, but also know that it can and will turn around. Well, connected to what I just said, my focus at this time is on is focused internal to the United States, because we have become considered in many places as not a welcoming nation anymore. And I think it's critically important that we work towards what I think is the reality of our citizenry, which is people are welcome and we embrace persons who come from everywhere. But that's not the message we're sending out as a nation. And so I think what matters at this moment in time in the United States, in the interest of international educational exchange, has to do with regulations and ways of being in the world so that people still know they're welcome, and so that we still have the richness of persons coming from everywhere. Be gentle with yourself. There's many idealists in this field, but whether you're an idealist or not, there's also a lot of passion in the field for what we do. And when times get really hard, sometimes people feel like giving up. Burnout is really easy in this profession. And so I would want to advise people to please turn to others, because you're not alone. Everybody has or will at some time face struggles in the workplace and in the nation. And you can get through it. Your work still matters. All of those things that we do collaboratively and all those things we do individually matter towards making our nation a welcoming place, but making social justice occur more broadly around the world, in our nation and around our nation. So the more we know each other and the more we take a learning mentality, like if I come into any interaction and my attitude is one of, oh boy, I get to learn something from this person, that learning mentality as it travels contributes tremendously to understanding, to cross-cultural and cross-national understanding. And so I think carrying a learning mentality really matters, being curious. I think laughter is central to survival, so it's important to also be able to laugh at your mistakes or at your, when you wish it had gone differently, but it didn't, you tripped. Just try to let it go. This is related to the learning mentality. So when I went to Ethiopia, I was there for about 6 weeks. I was staying in a highland village, living with 9 other people in the same, mud hut, the same as everybody in our village lived in. And this was my first international experience. And the 2 things that stood out to me, which I talked about for 2 years, I had to make presentations about my experience for 2 years. And what stood out to me about the Ethiopian people was their incredible hospitality and their generosity of spirit. And I'm going to give an example, because this is a metaphor for all of what we do. In terms of generosity of spirit, in my group of 9, there were 3 of us that were female, and we were invited to someone's home, which is much smaller than this room that we're currently in, and she served us, the 3 of us from the United States, Watan and Injera, the national dishes. And then we also, she gave us each a Sprite. And at the time, Sprite was 35 cents in Ethiopian dollars, $1.05. And I had to think, because it was a trade economy, not a monetary economy. And so I had to think, when would I, as a US American, spend what maybe took more than a month to make on making someone else feel welcome? And it made me permanently committed to welcoming, trying to make the warmth of my welcome even close to that which I received in Ethiopia and subsequently in countries all over the world. The second thing that I learned had to do with time and people. So in the US, we, a stitch in time saves 9. We rush. Time is this thing that's fast-paced. We got a schedule. We're behind schedule. In Ethiopia, the relationship and the conversation took precedence over time. So initially, this was frustrating for me. So the truck would say, we're going to pick you up at 9 a.m. At noon, the truck maybe wasn't there yet, but the truck eventually came and we went. And so I'm not advocating throwing out time, but what I am advocating is that if there's a conversation that's going on, you delay the work thing until the conversation's finished. And so the human relationship takes precedence. And like I said, there's a balance between time and the human relationship, but the human relationship always took precedent. And that's something else I've seen in many, many parts of the world that are less scheduled than we are. And so I appreciated both those learnings and then shared them. And so that first experience was what helped me become a cross-cultural trainer in terms of trying to talk about behavior in another place in terms that, in the context of the US. So like taking a month of salary to make someone feel welcome. That makes it more real for persons that don't have the opportunity to be in the other place.